Tony, welcome to the Async Book Club podcast. I have my co-host Marina up here or left here or right here, wherever Google chooses to put them. We really appreciate you being on our podcast / YouTube / whatever you want to call it, to the show.
Thank you both for inviting me. This will be fun, and I'm just happy to be part of the discussion.
Absolutely. So to start, I'm just going to read your impressive resume. It says, Anthony R. Wheeler is the Dean of the School of Business Administration and a Professor of Management at Widener University. His research focuses on employee turnover and retention, employee stress, burnout, engagement, and leadership. He has published in Journal of Management, Journal of Applied Psychology, Journal of Organizational Behavior, Journal of Business Research, Work and Stress, Leadership Quarterly, Journal of Occupational Health Psychology, International Journal of Selection and Assessment, Journal of Business Ethics, and Journal of Business Logistics. I didn't know there were so many journals. He is a co-editor of Research in Personnel and Human Resources Management and is consulted for Fortune 500 companies, startups, and governments. And I think most impressive, you are my most favorite business school professor. Because Marina, so Tony opened up every class with music playing. So we would all come in almost like a procession. And then every few classes, we would watch an episode of The Office and talk about it. So, and like, it was fun, but also I've referenced in my professional career so many times the lessons we've learned in those classes. So kudos to you. I'll let Marina start with further ado with like a kind of broad 10,000 foot perspective on this book and some questions for you.
Thank you so much for letting us do this. But biggest question, what inspired you to write this? And I guess what motivates you to talk about these things?
It's interesting because as Steve was kind of reading that very, over the top academic-y biography of me, the currency of most people in my field is peer-reviewed journal publications. We don't often get rewarded, and for those of you who have ever written a book, you would not be surprised to learn that like writing a book is not exactly a very profit-driven kind of endeavor as well. I had never thought of writing a book because I never really thought I had anything to say that was worthy of that kind of format, right? What had happened in kind of some of the years, and Steve's alluding to the times when I was at the University of Rhode Island, I had run their full-time MBA program. And during that time when I was running their full-time MBA program, we were coming into a lot of contact with companies that were really investing in technology in ways that at first glance was a little surprising. So I'll give you an example. We had a lot of projects with Fidelity, financial services, massive financial services company. And they invited us to their innovation lab in Boston. I don't know about the two of you, but anytime I hear finance people talking about being innovative, I get a little worried. I get worried that we're going to have another bad, implosion in our economy. And we go to this lab at Fidelity in Boston, and it's robots and it's all these other things that I would not have expected to encounter. I'd also been talking with a lot of accounting firms and asking a lot of questions about why they were investing so heavily into technology. At the time, we were just calling it algorithms. We weren't really talking about kind of AI as we do now. So that was sort of the genesis of it. Was I was seeing all of these other areas of business invest more and talk more about these types of technologies, but I hadn't seen anyone from a human resource management perspective talk about how these technologies would be affecting, this discipline and how this discipline relates to other business disciplines. And in the book, you see kind of, I think, societal implications. So that was really how I thought of it. Now I'll tell you, I had another funny idea for a book about crisis response. And had I known when I was writing the book just prior to COVID, had I known that there was going to be a pandemic, I probably would have written the book about crisis. But so that was it.
So this was published in 2020, correct? That's the copy.
2021. Yeah, I wrote it I started writing it in 2019, the contract with the publisher and all that, the proposal, all those things. That was all late 2018, 2019. I started writing it in 2019. And then the pandemic hit in March of 20. And actually, I had a hard time writing after that. I had written like 5 chapters prior to COVID.
Right.
And then I had a really hard time writing during COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I would say you're very ahead of this book is ahead of its time, because when you were writing it is on the cusp of all the major changes that were happening. So everything that you're writing here are things that people were not really even talking about as much yet, about the major displacement of workers in our society and how quickly it's going to happen. So I think I was just impressed with the fact that I had to look back and think, wait, when was this published? Because I can't believe that you were already deep into this topic when now people are really panicking about this issue.
Well, thank you. And I was, one of the reasons why I was looking forward to having that discussion with you all was because now you guys, I can't tell you the last time I actually really looked at the book. It's been a long, long time. But now you guys get to kind of fact check and see, like,
Oh yeah,
what,
get ready.
yeah, yeah, was what I was predicting, how much of it happened.
Yeah.
I feel like I was kind of in the ballpark on a lot of stuff, but I'm sure you guys are going to let me know.
Yeah.
Let's start off with page 13. There's a good quote. As the actual workforce contraction begins, the stress burnout cycle will only strengthen. That's kind of talking about how AI will replace jobs and there will be less people in the workforce. My pushback to that is AI definitely makes work way more efficient. So one person can do the work of sometimes 5, 10, 100 people. It depends on how good they use the AI. So my pushback to you, and maybe something that you've seen, and maybe Marina has seen, like, do you see that side of AI, and that it's like this like amazing personal assistant where it could actually decrease burnout? Because like how much burnout is from like just repetitive tasks that no one needs to do anymore.
Yeah, and you know, Steve, the thing about burnout is that it's multifaceted, right? So like sometimes the burnout's not always happening because of the tasks that you're performing.
Mm.
A lot of burnout occurs because of also kind of mental and emotional stressors. And I think that's really what I was alluding more to in that passage, in that quote you were reading, is that as all of this displacement is happening, and I think when you do stop and look around and see what's going on inside of organizations right now, all of the uncertainty, the layoffs, all of these kinds of things are all bound up in this technological displacement. So the employees themselves, their jobs may be complemented, and I hope later we talk about the distinction, because in the book I really didn't talk about this. This is now, as Marina noted, like we're plus 4 years, you know, on this book being published. I don't think anyone was talking about complementary versus sort of displacement types of technology. I viewed it all in the book as like displacing work, right? As opposed to what you're talking about as complementary AI to a job. So even though AI might be complementing people's work, the other swirl that's happening around organizations is also creating stress. So I think that's happening. I think that's probably what most of us are experiencing right now at work, is learning how to use the AI can create stress, but also seeing how it's creating uncertainty in the workforce and displacing the workforce. Right now, was maybe a month or so ago, a fairly large scale research project was completed looking at payroll data. And it was the first full set of data after kind of AI had been implemented in large swaths of the economy. And what these data suggest, and what the researchers who kind of posted about this suggest, is that unlike previous economic kind of uncertainty times when companies will start to lay people off, when they start looking to do that normally, they start looking at their cost structures, and they start looking at laying off people higher up in the infrastructure because the costs of those employees are much higher. What the new data are suggesting is that the bottom 2 rungs of the workforce ladder in corporate life are being knocked out. If I'm going to make a prediction right now, so we're recording this on October 27th of 2025. Next year at this time, if I'll make a prediction right now, and you guys can come yell at me or find me on LinkedIn, tell me if I was
It's
right or
on
wrong.
record now.
Yeah.
You know, a year from now, I think we're going to see unemployment for people 25 and younger eclipse 25%.
Wow.
And not good things happen in societies when that many young people are out of work, right? So that's what the data are suggesting, is that this next kind of early cohort of recent college grads are going to find the first two rungs of the ladder, of the corporate ladder, knocked out.
Wow.
And that's different. And that's where I'm talking about there's stress that's happening with that.
I really like what you wrote, which is the goal of economic activity should be to create value, not profit. And I think that's something that we forget often, or that companies forget. And I guess what I wanted to ask is, do you feel that AI and machine learning would assist in that element, that economic activity as a result would be more focused on value rather than profit?
You know, right now, I think the early returns are not promising. You know, I think when referring back to my previous kind of response, those two bottom rungs of the corporate ladder are being knocked out, not because someone has really thought about, okay, how is AI gonna create value in a workforce, in a company, in a society. They're simply looking at it as, well, we can just use AI to knock these job categories out, and that's going to increase our margins and without affecting our productivity. And then that's going to help us, have higher stock valuation or whatever metrics they're looking at. I would hope, Marina, and full transparency, when you write a book like this, where you're trying to take trends and predict them into the future, sometimes it can get a bit dark. when you're doing this, you can sometimes get in spots where you're like, this all feels like doom and gloom. I know that if AI is used in full capacity, it absolutely can create value, like for societies, for jobs, for us as humans. One thing that I like to remind people is, and it's something that I had people constantly tell me, technology is a tool. That's it. Technology is a tool, and how you use that tool. If you're going to use it as a hammer to just go break a bunch of stuff, that's not really creating value. Now, if you're using it as a screwdriver because you're trying to tighten some stuff, or you're trying to make some stuff better, it's a totally different way to use a tool. So right now, I do not feel particularly hopeful that AI is being seen as a value creator as much as companies are looking at it as a short-term profit boost. And we'll probably talk more about this in a minute or so, I'm guessing. But companies don't exactly have a lot of strategic nuance to them right now when it comes to adopting this tool. They're just like mashing buttons, like more AI, more AI. And they're not stopping to think about, how is this complementary versus displacing, right? They're not thinking about that. They're just, everything's a nail, and they're just whacking it.
Along that point, actually, on page 31, you have a quote: machines can exhibit judgment or make decisions that are consistent with human judgment and decision making. I think the funny thing about that quote is the phenomenon of hallucinations. And I think that's something that a lot of us know about and experience with, you ask ChatGPT something and it responds with something that sounds really smart. And then you look into the link that they send or wrote, and it doesn't exist. And the data just doesn't exist. And lawyers are even getting, Marina's a lawyer, by the way, lawyers are even getting fired because they're using these fake cases in court. And the judge's like, what are you smoking? And they're losing their license. So how does that factor into this? Because that is kind of the Achilles heel of this technology. How do we combat that?
And when I was writing the book, remember, like, we didn't know what AI hallucinations were, right? Like this is pre-Chat GPT.
Yeah.
And so like talk about a phenomena that I'm not sure anyone really could have predicted.
Well, you kind of did predict it with that sentence.
Yeah, I mean, like
right?
the thing about AI as opposed to machine learning is that AI explicitly requires humans to code. So therefore you should expect the machine to respond to stimuli in the way that they've been coded to respond, which is why the idea of hallucinations is like, what's going on here? Like, it wasn't like this was coded into their system. Now, when we get into things like machine learning, which, when you look at large language models, the LLMs I tend to think of the LLMs, and there could be some technologists, listening to this later, who will tell me I'm looking at this too simplistically, and I might be. But the LLMs to me are sort of like this bridge between AI and machine learning, where you're training the AI through the LLM models to actually now start to think for themselves. So I tend to view them as like the bridge. I think when we get into more machine learning applications as the AI matures, then I would start thinking like, yeah, like these hallucinations are going to happen more and more frequently, because that's when the machines become self-aware. They start making decisions outside of their coding framework, right? They can take on theoretically their own value systems. But for AI, we're supposed to be coding in these value systems. And so for the machines to be going outside of our explicit programming right now, that certainly is a surprise. But to the point that you made about what I'd written in the book, it's that as the machine learning kicks in, yeah, like the machines will start to have their own value systems, like, because they're going to be like humans, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
So this is a related comment. So you wrote, in fact, the current state of artificial intelligence and machine learning are likely decades away from replicating human decision making, let alone being embedded into automated devices. Now, this was, of course, 2018, 2019. And so I wanted to ask, do you still hold this position given the changes?
No. And so here's what's interesting too. And I didn't write about, I mean, maybe I did towards the back end of the book. When I was writing the book, I mentioned like I had this really, like, it was like maybe like a 6-month break where I literally could not write anything during COVID. Like, we had all the time in the world and I just couldn't bring myself to write. And then the publisher was like, "Are you still going to deliver that book?" And I was like, "Oh my God." And I had to, and I went back and read the first 5 chapters again. And what struck me in that 6-month period was how much things had accelerated because of COVID. All of the technology that really has been around, like Zoom's been around for a while. Very few people had ever heard of Zoom before COVID. Now Zoom is everywhere, right? But back then, not a lot of people were using it. It was, I don't think it was a startup company necessarily, but it certainly wasn't this massive, technology platform it is now. So all this existing technology, a lot of the AI technology has, been out there for a little bit. And certainly the automotive technology has been out there for a long, long time. During COVID, Americans especially, we tend to be more conservative about allowing the machines to do things for us. Like Japan and South Korea and China, their societal norms view that type of human technology interaction as sort of like cool, whereas we're all scared of the Terminator, right? We're all scared of it becoming a bad sci-fi movie. But COVID forced Americans, and forced therefore their companies, to start using all these technologies to solve the work from home problem.
Right.
And once that happened, it all accelerated. And so, ChatGPT 2.0 was this evolutionary jump from ChatGPT 1 to 2 that happened post-COVID. So all of these evolutionary jumps in AI and LLMs all sped up I think, because COVID forced people to use the tools and technology, which allowed more use cases of the tools and technology. And then they've been refining and making these jumps. So Marina, absolutely. Like everything, and I tell people this, everything I wrote in that book about like sort of milestones have all been shifted up, like a decade, half a decade. They've all been shifted up. Like I talked about self-driving cars in the book, and I'm saying, oh, by 2030, self-driving cars are going to be like normal. That was before Waymo was created. Right? So like, that's how quickly it all accelerated.
Yeah, the end of this chapter, you wrote that AI will be able to write a novel by 2049. So that led me
That
to
humans, right? That we wouldn't be able to tell if it had been written by a human or a machine.
Right.
Yep.
So my question to you is kind of like, how long did it take you after ChatGPT was created to realize, oh shit, I was off? Was it like right away? Was it later? And maybe what was the bias that, so you think the American bias, but maybe also the fact that you were struggling writing, that you're like, oh man, it's going to take this a while, you know? So there's like a bias thing. And also like how long did it take you to realize, oh shit, this is crazy?
When ChatGPT 2 came out,
yeah,
I had like tinkered around. Like I had seen the initial ChatGPT stuff, and I was like, this thing's far off.
Yeah.
And then ChatGPT 2 came out, and it was like immediately I was like, well, that's a jump. And it's funny because it looks like, and I'm just going to focus on OpenAI right now, because their suite of technology tools, like you've got ChatGPT, you have DALL-E, which is a text to photo generator, and then Sora is a text to video generator. It seems like what happens with OpenAI is their first models come out and are cool. Like you're like, wow, look at that. Like that's really neat. And then it seems like every time they release version 2, they make these like evolutionary jumps. When you see Sora 2 right now, it is stunning, the type of video, and now you can embed voice into it. It's wild. It is wild, that evolutionary jump. So I think having a couple of billion people flip from working in companies on site to now working remotely, I think it provided so much more user case data for all of these technologies to refine and make these jumps. I think COVID was an accelerant. And Steve, like seriously, when 2.0 came out, I was like, whoa, well, we need to shift all of this up now. Like this is all shifting very quickly, very quickly.
You mentioned that, inequality between genders and ethnicities, that, that plague companies will be eradicated or greatly reduced through AI. So I wanted to ask you if you still hold that position, first of all, and then second of all, how do you envision that changing? How do you envision AI correcting these issues?
So a lot of it has to do with anytime you have human intervention, you're going to get human bias, right? Like I can think that I am a totally bias-free person about everything. And if I'm the one doing the coding for an AI application, any of my biases will seep into that coding. And if I'm working with groups of people who are more similar to me than not, then like they may not catch my bias, right? There may be no kind of peer review. And what we saw early out of like models like ChatGPT was they were very much biased towards men. They were very much biased towards dominant demographic categories inside of different nations. My belief is that as the AI gets more refined and as the coders themselves become better equipped to actually code in bias checks into the AI, that we should see reductions in bias, that we should see more equitable types of outcomes happening from this tool. And as things get into more of the machine learning, where the machine is learning from itself based upon feedback it's getting from users, again, you would hope, and theoretically, I think this is what people are theoretically thinking is going to happen, is that the machines will sort of wring out our natural biases. But to Steve's question earlier on, like maybe the machines will end up just putting their own biases in ways that like we haven't really intended. But Marina, I do think, I am hopeful that one of the things that AI can do as it gets more sophisticated is start to include more of those bias checks to self-correct and remove our own biases in the situation. But you may disagree.
No, actually, you know what? I think you just sold me on that, because I was questioning it a little bit, but I think you have a very good point. I think I'm sold.
But I might be wrong, and that's the thing. Like anytime
Right. Yeah, no, I hope you're right.
anytime you write anything down, or go onto a podcast, or go onto a live stream or something, you're recording all that information. And anytime you get someone who maybe is dumb enough to make predictions about the future, I could be wrong.
Definitely not dumb. Definitely not dumb. I think in terms of the bias, ChatGPT already has an argumentative mode that you can choose, and instead of it confirming the things you're saying, it'll purposely argue with you. And I think that's one example of that, where it could remove your own bias. It's like almost like be your devil's advocate.
Exactly, right? It really is like scenario testing you.
But you have to like go out of your way, because it's lazy at the end of the day. It's like a lazy intern. There's something that you wrote on page 86 that I agree with a lot, and actually was confirmed yesterday from a friend of mine who recently started a company, and he doesn't need to outsource at all. And one of the reasons he doesn't need to outsource is because his people in the US, they're all coming in hard with AI technology, and they know what to use. So therefore, like, their value is already amazing. And you wrote, it is more likely that fewer accountants will exist, and those jobs will rely heavily on algorithms and machines to complete the routine facets of the job. But then, 2 sentences later, we will also see a slew of jobs that do not currently exist. So I think there's like AI prompters. That's a very popular one. But just like jobs that use this technology, it's like an AI video creator, right? Like you said about Sora, or an AI image creator, digital graphic designer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in some ways, it's the same job. It's just they have this tool that allows them to be 10x, 100x, 1000x. So my actually final question to you is there going to be insourcing, because AI technology is so freaking good that it doesn't make sense to go to the Philippines, right?
Yeah, I mean, Steve, I think that's a really, really important insight, right, that you just said. One of the things that I think especially we don't consider, and it's not like an American phenomena. Like we could be in Germany right now having the same conversation, and we would also be susceptible to kind of a patterned way of thinking, in that we tend to think the rest of the world operates the same way that we operate. And you can look right now about almost any topic that's going on right now in business or socially, and you will see, I tend to use the global north versus global south type of framing of this. What's happening in the global south is you're not seeing the technological adoption because the educational gap is already wider in the global south. The wealth gaps are wider in the global south. So here we are sitting in the US, and we're thinking, well, yeah, this is going to happen everywhere. Like, this is going to be adopted the same way everywhere. it probably will be adopted in very similar ways in the global north, because the global north is from a business perspective, there's far less variance about what happens business wise in the global north. So why would we outsource to the Philippines when you're right? We can just have, you know, two data scientists who are helping create an internal AI app that is kind of developed in concert with subject matter experts in the company, right? Like highly, you know, highly sort of customized type AI applications. Like that's happening now. It's going to accelerate. So yeah, why would we outsource to the Philippines? If 70% of accounting work was going to be outsourced to Russia and China and other parts of Southeast Asia, now there's no need to do that. And even on a cost basis, there's probably no need to do some of that now, because you're right. Like you can custom design an AI solution for your company in your industry, and you no longer need your workforce anywhere to do that. So, the thing I worry about though, related to this point, is from a societal perspective, this technology and these related technologies are going to make all of the gaps we have wider. Health, wealth, technology, education, they're all going to get wider. Rural, city, they're all going to get wider and wider and wider. You never know how humans will respond to that type of inequality. You can always count on humans to do something to destroy what seemingly could be something great for everyone. Does that mean that problems in the global south will create problems in the global north? If I was going to put money on it, that's what I would think would happen. Who knows what's going to happen? Right now, I just saw something 2 weeks ago. There are some states in the US right now that 40% of their electrical output is going to data centers. When you have that type of concentration of energy going to one kind of sector, what happens if someone blows that up?
Right.
So, those gaps are what scare me the most. The technology doesn't necessarily scare me. It's always the haves and have-nots that scare me more. Sorry for the soapbox.
No, that's good
No.
stuff. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it. I was gonna alley up to your next quote on 149, but
Actually, I wanted to skip ahead because what I wanted to bring up is something that you were just speaking about, which is the wide gap of inequality. And I believe this was in last chapter 154, where you're discussing UBI, so universal basic income, and how that may be a potential solution and perhaps even a necessity in the world of AI. And you mentioned some studies, and I think that this was just, I love this section where you discussed how, evidence really shows that this does increase educational, nutritional, physical, and mental health and overall well-being. So I think I just have so many questions on that, but I guess in the basic level of, do you still hold the position that this would be possibly the best solution? Do you see this potentially being adopted globally, or at least with some countries? And what's your take on it?
I still do think it will become an absolute necessity. I, of course, as an American, I worry about our ability to have universal basic income, because we have a very strained relationship with our social safety net programs in this country. We have such a hard time agreeing on anything, and that worries me. I think we are seeing more robust UBI type programs being experimented with now more than ever. When you go to Europe, I think I used Denmark as a big example in the book as sort of like a country that has robust social safety nets. They've got growing economy, but they've got a shrinking workforce, and a workforce that is highly vulnerable to digital displacement. What do you do in a country when people can't find work? What's the point of the country if everyone leaves? Like the country goes away if all you're left with are very, very young people and very, very old people. What happens to the country? So I do think that we are going to have to take a very serious look into UBI. I'll tell you what I've become more open to about the UBI conversation is how to fund it. You know, especially in our country, right? Like it would be a tax, and our country doesn't deal well with that, with taxing, right? Like the political fighting is just monumental when it comes to any types of tax levying in our country. But maybe what I'm a little more open to, as opposed to sort of pure government funding of UBI, which is what you normally see now, right? You normally see countries setting aside tax generated revenue and deploying it to social safety net programs. That's what's happening in Europe, where you see more of this UBI type thinking taking off more. But there are other ways to fund this. And I think I've become more open to the idea of incentivizing the right things around UBI. And what I mean by that is, you know, look, half of our society seems to think that if you have any social safety net program, that anyone that uses it is going to abuse it. Now, we know statistically that does not happen. We know statistically that a very, very small percent of people abuse these systems, but that small number becomes gets blown up as everyone's doing this. And so there is always this worry that, you know, some big number is going to abuse UBI and everyone's going to be sitting at home, and it's going to become like the movie WALL-E, you know, where we're all fat and sitting in chairs and we can't move and AI is doing everything for us. I've become a little more open-minded around what might be more of like a workforce redevelopment tool with UBI, in that if a company displaces a job with AI, that they have to take a part of the savings they've accrued and they have to use that to retrain or redevelop people so they can find work in other settings, which would still be a form of UBI. I get a little worried about quote unquote work requirements, you know, that those can tend to be used in bad ways too. But I think how you fund UBI, I think, is a real interesting question. I think there are ways that corporations can also be part of this social safety net program, where they can invest in UBI because they also see it as a good for society, but potentially also as a good for their own businesses in terms of redeveloping talent. I do unfortunately believe that, unlike previous industrial revolutions, we are in one where more jobs will be eliminated than will be created. And that is a huge problem. And I think UBI is really a way to at least stabilize what could be a really bad situation.
You could also use tariffs. There's
Just thinking about that.
there's some people out there, because I listen to all sorts of news and perspectives, and there's some people that suspect that one of the purposes of the tariffs is to get rid of the income tax completely and to have a pure sales tax, which would be the hugest form of UBI. Because like we already have a social safety net, and as you said, it's not really being abused that much with Medicaid and food stamps, which are currently not going to be working for a little bit, but that's hopefully a temporary thing. But for everybody in the middle, they do pay a pretty good amount of money, especially the middle people that are struggling with kids and jobs and all that kind of stuff. So it'd be interesting if tariffs ends up doing that.
Well, so in there, and Steve, I have heard similar kinds of inklings that, you know, when you look at the current presidential administration, the kind of Silicon Valley wing that has been supporting the current presidential administration, a lot of the tech people who are very, very supportive of what's happening right now around immigration, some of the guessing about why they're kind of happy with some of the immigration policies and tactics are that these some of these supporters, some of these businesses are investing very heavily in autonomous machines.
Mm.
So, you know, what better way to stimulate more research and development and production of autonomous workers than if you have a severe shortage of workers?
Right.
Right. So if you're going to deport our entire agro workforce, someone still has to pick the crops and plant the crops and do those things. If we don't have a labor force available to do it, and we have now a shrinking population, which we will without immigration, then autonomous machines become a solution to this workforce void. And when you look at some of the people who are very, very keen on some of this, these are some of the biggest backers of developing autonomous working machines to deploy in areas like agriculture. So Steve, I've heard kind of similar thinking that this could be a thing. One quick thing I want to remind everyone of: the largest, oldest, and most successful UBI program that the world has ever seen is in the United States. The Alaska Petroleum Fund is the largest, oldest form of UBI. When you are a citizen of Alaska, you get a check cut to you and sent to you every year per person of a certain value. It depends on what the price of oil is at the time. They've been doing this for decades, and it is a pure form of UBI, period. So it's interesting in this country that we have this huge argument over things like UBI and social safety nets, and you know, does UBI create a bunch of people who are going to be scamming the system and abusing the system? Look no farther than our 50th state to see an example of a UBI program run at scale. It is run at scale for decades.
How did Andrew Yang not bring that up last time? That was a huge miss.
I'm not sure. I don't quite remember. He might have.
Yeah.
Or maybe he was afraid of offending people in Alaska. Maybe he thought they'd vote for him, and maybe he thought they'd get mad at him. It's a UBI form. Like,
yeah,
you get sent a check. I think last year it was like $3,000 per person. Wow. There is a sizable portion of Alaska's population, because it's per person, so it's per family member. So if you have a family of, you know, 5 people, 6 people, your UBI for the year is $18,000. And if you are a subsistence farmer living in rural Alaska, that $18,000 is your salary. That is your income for the year. Wow. It's all they generate. That is not a small portion of people in Alaska, right? So we've been running UBI in this country for like 40 years. Anyway,
Marina, I have you on 149, but before that, I have something to say, which Tony, you don't have to comment on, but on 148 it says human interactions will remain vital in technologically advanced societies, as it will always be humans who will teach us how to be human and nurture our humanity. And that reminded me of my favorite Professor Wheeler. So, yeah.
Well, Marina, thank you, Steve.
149 is all yours.
Yes, thank you. Yes. So you talk about how students' knowledge, skills, abilities, success, failures, interests, all these things will create a long data trail that will help universities and employers and governments identify opportunities to maximize each person's potential. So that's this kind of made me think feels like a Black Mirror episode a little bit, where by the time that a student is 18, their whole personality, all their skills and abilities have all been meticulously tracked. So they know exactly what box to put them in. So how do you envision this future? again, has anything changed how you see this now?
So by this point in the book, I'd mentioned earlier that when you're writing this kind of book, you can find yourself in some pretty dark places. And I had to consciously actually stop to think, okay, what could some upside of all of this be? Right? Like, what I've been writing about, all like this job going away, this industry being impacted, all these kind of like not so nice things happening. I had to stop and kind of think through, like, what could some positives be? Not only do I think this is where we are headed, I think it's already happening. I was flying back from Texas on Friday, and on the plane, there was a younger couple with an 8-month-old baby who was already getting screen time.
Oh my God.
Right? So, like, the open question, Marina, to me is, who has these data, right? Like, is it just the companies? If the companies just have the data, then maybe we don't see exactly what you referenced me saying in the book about being able to track and understand who someone is, and therefore figure out ways to help develop them in more holistic ways. I do think, though, that even within schools, my son, who's now 18, he was the first year of elementary school where they no longer taught handwriting. So even from an educational perspective, most of our children now are going to be put in elementary school systems where their data are going to be tracked from the minute they get there at age 5 until they're done at age 18 if they go through our K through 12 educational system. So even though the companies still might have a lot of that data from their, Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok, right? Like, yes, the companies still will have that, but the data, the ed tech business is also pretty robust. And those ed tech systems are also generating a ton of data. It's whether or not they're identifying the data directly to the individual learner, and how then are they using that to help not sell another product, but develop students to be better people, better learners, better citizens. Throughout the last couple of years, especially, I go back, I've been going back more and more and more to the founders, the framers of our Constitution, and how they thought about democracy. And, there's Ben Franklin quotes on this about, the reason why education is important is because an educated citizenry is what stops autocracy from happening. It's having an educated population is what makes democracy flourish. If you're at all familiar with what's called the Flynn effect, the Flynn effect is this fairly robust finding that every generation in our country and even globally, that as generations accumulate, intelligence scores go up. So the idea that, like, every generation gets smarter than the previous generation. This has been kind of one of these pieces of information, of data, that people use to say, look, humans are still evolving. Like, we're part of evolution. Evolution's ongoing. It doesn't stop. Look, humans are getting smarter. So it's called the Flynn effect. For the first time ever, last year, global IQ scores went down.
Idiocracy.
Scary. It's scary. So
Yeah.
the other thing to think about, and this is, again, just a side point, I hate to, like, go off here, Marina, maybe your law background, you've thought more about this as well. I'd totally forgotten that the ancient Greek philosophers who first started talking about democracy, they believed in Plato, Aristotle, all of them. They believed that democracy would always die, that it would always end in autocracy, because the population would get tired of governing itself. That we would simply just become exhausted from having to govern ourselves through democracy. And we would just want to pick someone to just make decisions for us. And you stop and look around what's going on globally right now, and you wonder if those Greeks weren't right 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On a
That's a good
positive
point.
note, I have a 156, and this is something you wrote. So I think you went dark and now you went light. People will still find meaning in work. However, the nature of work for many citizens will fundamentally change. Knowing what you know about ChatGPT and its implications, how will people find meaning in work? Like how do you think people find meaning in work right now? Even let's not predict the future.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that very question, Steve. And you and I actually talked a little bit about it when we met up a couple weeks ago. You know, I have children who are in college right now, and their view of how work or their careers will fit into their lives is very different than my generation. My generation, we very much were brought up on this idea that, like, you know, the goal is to find work that you find meaningful, that you're making an impact, that work is really, really meaningful to you. And evolutionarily, I think that's still true. However, I think my generation has a very unhealthy attachment to work that I think subsequent generations are starting to rethink that work relationship for the better. So I think right now, I think people still do find meaning in what they do, even if the meaning is simply a means to an end, right? That, like, I'm going to do this job and it's going to allow me to be able to do these other things that I also find meaning in. That could be enough of a meaning. I hope that for those of us who are engaged in more pro-social types of careers, that we still do find meaning and joy in advancing the betterment of our fellow global citizens, travelers in this world. I hope that's still the case. I am beginning to wonder, though, if we're seeing some fragmenting of this, and I wonder if some of that explains why younger people in particular are so disillusioned at such young ages with employment.
Another positive comment that you made is about how potentially AI, machine learning, and automation will lead to the second renaissance, because humans, of course, will see connection and will then have more of a chance to explore the creative side of themselves, because their manual route tasks will be taken by AI. So do you still see it that way? Is this aspirational? Do you think that it may not happen?
I think it is aspirational, and I do really hope that that's where we go. As a species, right? When you're so immersed in work, sometimes you have a hard time being creative in your own personal space. All of us are creative in our own different ways, and I do think that if each of us had more time in our week to not worry about paying the bills or doing this or doing that, and we could just be in these moments, I do think we could see a second renaissance where all kinds of new art and music and writing, or even if it's people engaging in gardening, or as Steve and I have been talking about more recently, volunteering for animal shelters, right? Like, I think there are a lot of really good things that can come out of having more time to not worry about work and not worry about a paycheck. So it is aspirational. I do think we can see more of that. It might start out in pockets. It might start out in certain countries that are maybe more progressive in how they're using UBI and those kinds of things. Maybe that was just a big hope, though.
I like the idea, though. I could see it, in a positive world where maybe UBI is adopted. That could happen.
I hope so.
Yeah, I see it happening. I've seen it happen in my own life with the ability to, instead of have to spend hours writing some like really boring thing that is not that good. It takes like a lot less time to write something that's definitely much better and like professional grade. On your last page, you write, "We feel confident that human resources will expand its role from the workplace to helping societies." What happens if AI replaces HR completely? Is that a possibility? Like, when I think of HR, I think of like almost like this conflict mitigator. What my friend just yesterday said, internal customer service. What happens? Because there is some conflict of interest there, where some people don't trust AI, HR, or HR has a pattern of not really siding and helping the employee. What happens? Can you see AI replacing HR completely? Or yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I absolutely can see most of the HR functions being displaced. I mentioned really early in our conversation today this idea that companies are not engaging in very strategic, nuanced type thinking about how to even adopt AI, but they're just sort of like, we all have to, it's all FOMO. They're all like, we got to adopt AI. We got to adopt AI. And they're all running around like, there's personally, I think we're in an AI bubble right now, like our stock market. I think we're headed for, this feels to me very much like the dot-com boom and bust, where I read something like right now in the investment world, people are like, yeah, right now people have identified 50 AI unicorns. I don't know about you guys, but unicorns there aren't supposed to be 50 of them. A unicorn's supposed to be like this one singular unique thing. And investors right now are loading up on 50 AI quote unquote unicorns. I mean, I think that's problematic, but this feels very much like that, like the dot-com boom and bust. I don't think that companies are engaging in very nuanced discussions about, do we want to displace this job with AI or do we want to complement? We're already starting to see some evidence that companies go and lay off a whole layer of their company, only to realize very quickly that they need to hire some of them back because the AI is complementary AI as opposed to like displacement AI. But everyone's under pressure to adopt AI, to use AI. And really, when they're saying that they're using AI, most of them are just using ChatGPT and they think like that's it. So I really don't think AI is going to displace all of HR, because the three of us sitting here having a conversation about, hey, what parts of that job can be complemented by AI so that the person can be more productive? That's an HR discussion. That's totally an HR discussion. It's a workforce development discussion. And so those kinds of things, I think, are always going to be happening, even if workforces are shrinking. I don't think all the jobs are going to go away. I think a lot of them are going to just shrink pretty significantly. But the other thing in that passage that you quoted, Steve, where I was coming from in that passage, I had spent a little bit of time previously talking about how I think that there could be this really interesting confluence around what's happening in social work and HR. That societies and government would have to be involved in this, obviously, that there has to end up being some sort of interface between companies and government, and how, when the government starts seeing that rounds of people are being displaced, how do you kick in UBI anyway? Government's going to have to be involved. So I was thinking through like some of the things that happen in social work around helping people figure out where services are and what services to use and how long the services last. And, it's almost like a counseling kind of mentality. I think HR and social work can sort of have this more societal fusion. And so HR type thinking might just happen in different contexts. Some of the HR functions might be severely contracted, but you still have to have people who understand what's going on. Otherwise, yeah, if you're just going to let the machines do everything, then what's the point? Like, then close up the employment shop for humans, period. Right?
I just want to close off with, because we're coming up on an hour, so I really appreciate your time, Tony. Final quote. is, as Calvin said in his last words to comic friend antagonist Hobbes, it's a magical world, Hobbes, old buddy. Let's go exploring. Consider your imagination provoked. This is my favorite comics from my childhood. And looking back at it, it had a huge impact, I think, on my philosophy. I think it's one of the reasons why I became an atheist at like 12 years old. And I just want to say, like, this book for me was definitely very eye-opening. And despite giving you like curveball questions and hardball questions, I think it's an excellent read. And I think a lot of people could benefit from reading it. Marina, I think you could agree too as well.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I'm really glad that Steve, you suggested this book. It was, I'll say, such an easy read as well. Just you go through it and you consume it so because it's so relevant right now. So very fortunate. So thank you, honestly, because this is really fun and really relevant.
Well, Marina, like, thank you for saying that too, because when I first started talking to the publisher, I told them I did not want to write a book for academics. And I told them that I would not even use like a citation and referencing system that they wanted me to use because I thought it would get in the way of readers. And so hearing you say that makes me happy, because my intent was to write a book that people would find like useful and engaging and not overly like academic-y. I didn't want anything seeming like I was writing this for an audience of people like myself, academics who are just going to yell and scream about stuff. I wanted to use kind of popular references. I wanted to use, sort of quotes from movies and books and comic strips. Like, those things were important because I wanted the readability of it to be like an easy read while maybe you were still kind of getting some good knowledge. And as Steve kind of alluded to earlier, I was the professor, who would sneak in video clips of movies and popular TV shows and those kinds of things because I wanted people to have fun. And if you're having fun with something, it's much easier to learn. So thank you for saying that maybe, and Stephen, thank you for your kindness, on the comments you made as well too. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
No,
this book is a nice bridge. We finished Player Piano by Kurt Vonnegut before this book, which is excellent fiction of like AI and technology creating displacement. And then now I'm reading Permutation City, which is not so popular, but also is a futuristic AI kind of virtual reality thing. So your book is like this like nonfiction that's kind of in the middle of it. And it's nice. It's nice going along the theme, but a different perspective. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Thank you.